The flashing red and blue lights reflected off my moving truck as I stood there holding a box labeled Kitchen Essentials. Completely dumbfounded, two officers approached me with serious expressions while my movers froze mid-step, unsure whether to continue. Unloading, the taller officer cleared his throat and said they'd received a call about a disturbance at this address. I glanced around at my perfectly peaceful move-in process, then noticed her. Patricia Thornton stood on her manicured lawn, 3 houses down, clipboard in hand, and a satisfied smirk spreading across her face. She gave me a little wave with her perfectly manicured nails, and I knew exactly who had called 911. The officers asked for identification and proof of ownership, while Patricia marched over her heels, clicking against the pavement like a countdown to confrontation. She announced in a voice dripping with false concern that she had seen suspicious individuals loading items into a truck and felt it was her duty as HOA president to ensure the safety of the community. The shorter officer rolled his eyes slightly as I produced my closing documents, driver's license, and moving company contract. Patricia's face fell when she realized her plan to humiliate me was backfiring. Just 5 days earlier, I had signed the closing papers on my dream home in Oak Ridge Heights, an upscale gated community with pristine lawns and strict HOA regulations. The 4-bedroom colonial had everything I wanted after years of saving and career advancement. My real estate agent had warned me about the Active Homeowners Association, but I figured following some rules about lawn height and mailbox colors would be a small price to pay for living in such a beautiful neighborhood. My first encounter with Patricia happened the day after closing when I stopped by to measure for furniture. She materialized on my driveway before I even got my key in the door, introducing herself as president with a tone that suggested I should bow. She looked me up and down, taking in my work clothes, an older model sedan, then asked if I was the contractor. When I explained I was the new owner, her smile tightened. She launched into questions about where I worked, whether I understood the community standards, and if I was aware that Oak Ridge Heights had certain expectations for its residents. The way she emphasized certain made my skin crawl, but I chalked it up to an overzealous neighbor and tried to stay positive. She handed me a 3-inch binder containing the HOA rules and regulations, explaining with condescending sweetness that some people found the standards challenging to maintain. Her eyes lingered on my car as she mentioned a requirement for vehicles to be no more than 5 years old and washed weekly. When I politely thanked her for the information, she added that the HOA conducted monthly property inspections and that she personally oversaw compliance. The threat in her voice was unmistakable, but I was too excited about my new home to let her dampen my spirits. Now, as the police officers checked my moving permits and verified my ownership documents, Patricia strutted over with her clipboard, clutched like a weapon. She announced in a shrill voice that she had concerns about unauthorized vehicles and potential criminal activity. The officers exchanged glances as I produced every possible document proving I owned the house. After 20 embarrassing minutes, they apologized for the inconvenience and left, but not before giving Patricia a warning about misusing emergency services. The next 3 weeks became my personal nightmare, orchestrated by Patricia Thornton. Brought a new HOA violation notice taped to my door, my moving boxes visible through the garage window. For 2 hours, violated subsection 3. For the placement of my trash can 6 in too far from the curb, warranted a $50 fine. She even claimed my doorbell was too loud and disrupted the peaceful ambiences of the neighborhood. I started keeping a folder of her complaints, which grew thicker by the day. Her harassment escalated beyond official notices. I caught her taking photos of my house at all hours, sometimes standing in my driveway at 6 o'clock in the morning. She told other neighbors I was running an illegal business because I worked from home twice a week. When I had 2 friends over for dinner, she filed a complaint about an unauthorized gathering. The HOA board, which she had stacked with her allies over the years, rubber stamped every one of her ridiculous fines. By the end of the first month, I owed over $800 in violations. The psychological warfare was exhausting. Patricia recruited her inner circle to monitor my every move. Margaret Sullivan from across the street kept a log of when I left for work and returned home. Douglas Brennan measured my grass with an actual ruler every Saturday morning. Even my mail carrier mentioned that Patricia had questioned him about the types of packages I received. I started feeling like a prisoner in my own home, checking windows before opening curtains, and timing my yard work to avoid confrontations. One evening, I discovered Patricia had created a private social media group called Oak Heights Concerned Citizens, where she posted photos of my property with captions like suspicious activity
With increasing
and standards
hostility
violation
about
and
property
property
values,
had
and
over 40
maintaining the
members
right
who kind of neighborhood. When I confronted her about it, she claimed it was a private group for safety discussions and threatened to fine me for harassment if I didn't leave her alone. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon when I was working in my home office movement in my backyard caught my eye, and I watched in disbelief as Patricia walked across my lawn, pressed against my window, and started taking photos of my office. Set up, I immediately called the police, but when they arrived, she spun an elaborate tale about her neighborhood watch duties and concern for suspicious activity. She claimed she saw someone suspicious in my backyard and was just checking to make sure everything was safe. The officers seemed skeptical, but said it was a civil matter. That night, I decided Patricia Thornton had messed with the wrong person. I spent hours researching HOA bylaws and discovered I had the right to request financial records. What I found over the next few days changed everything. Patricia had been using her position to selectively enforce rules, finding certain residents while ignoring violations from her friends. More importantly, there were significant discrepancies in the HOA finances. Thousands of dollars in maintenance funds had been redirected to a landscaping company owned by her brother-in-law, and meeting minutes had been falsified to hide improper votes. I methodically built my case, obtaining sworn statements from other residents who had been harassed, documenting the financial irregularities, and even installing security cameras that captured Patricia trespassing on my property multiple times. I reached out to neighbors who had suffered under her reign, and slowly a coalition formed. Robert Morrison from 2 had been fined for his rose bushes being the wrong shade of pink. The Patel family had endured constant harassment about their traditional decorations during Diwali. Everyone had stories, but no one had ever challenged Patricia's iron grip on the HOA. The monthly HOA meeting arrived, and I came prepared. The community center was packed with far more residents than usual, filling every seat. Patricia sat at the board table, gavel in hand, looking annoyed at the turnout. When she tried to rush through the agenda, I stood and invoked my right to present concerns. Her face turned crimson as I calmly laid out each piece of evidence. Financial records appeared on the projection screen, showing unauthorized transfer. Security footage played of her trespassing on multiple properties. 15 residents stood to share their experiences of harassment and selective enforcement. The room erupted as neighbors who had stayed silent for years finally found their voices. Patricia banged her gavel frantically, declaring the meeting out of order, but the other board members looked uncomfortable. One board member, clearly seeing which way the wind was blowing, called for an emergency vote to suspend Patricia pending an investigation. The vote was 4-1, with only Patricia voting against her own suspension. She stood up so fast her chair toppled over, screaming that we would all regret this and that she would sue everyone in the room. The investigation that followed was thorough and damning. A forensic accountant found misappropriated over $200,000 over Patricia's 6-year tenure as president. She had been awarding contracts to family members using HOA funds for personal legal fees and maintaining a secret account where she deposited fines from residents. She didn't like the state attorney's office got involved, and Patricia was charged with embezzlement and fraud. The HOA board voted unanimously to ban her from any leadership position for life and pursued a civil suit to recover the stolen funds. The civil trial was swift and decisive. Patricia was ordered to pay back $350,000 in stolen funds, plus damages. Her legal fees alone exceeded $200,000. Facing financial ruin and criminal charges, she had no choice but to list her $1.2 million house for sale. The for sale sign went up on a Monday, and by Friday, she was packing boxes under the watchful eyes of residents she had tormented for years. As the moving truck pulled away, Patricia sat in her luxury SUV, tears streaming down her face, while her lawyer explained that the criminal trial would likely result in 3 to 5 years in prison. Her final act of defiance came when she tried to leave a scathing 1-star review of the neighborhood online, but even that backfired when dozens of residents responded with their own stories of her abuse of power. The district attorney, after reviewing all the evidence, announced they would seek the maximum sentence of 5 years, plus full restitution. Patricia's husband filed for divorce the same week, citing financial devastation and criminal association. She stood in the courtroom, no longer the imposing figure who had terrorized our neighborhood, but a broken woman facing the consequences of years of corruption and harassment. When the judge announced she would be held without bail pending trial due to flight risk, Patricia collapsed into her chair, finally understanding that her reign of terror was